everybody. Thank you for coming. We are the Flagstaff Pedestals, Street Altars, and Inscriptions of Venice project team. I am Eli Klappenbach.
I'm Grace Galley.
I'm Marissa Matsushige.
And I'm Zach Seville.
All right, getting right into the general overview of our project. So we collected 1,285 artifacts, and within these artifacts, we collected 3 types. So we documented 59 Flagstaff pedestals, and these hold the flagpole and flag, and they often have inscriptions or art on their sides. We also collected 194 street altars, and they are a place of worship at street level, and they often depict a religious figure or the Virgin Mary usually. And then lastly, we collected 1,032 inscriptions, and these are carvings or imprints, and we only collected the ones that are in external public spaces. So getting into our Flagstaff pedestals, these are the components of a complete Flagstaff system. So first we have the finial. Usually it's a figure of the St. Mark's Lion. Sometimes religious figures are different shapes. Then we have the flag, usually the Venetian flag, sometimes the Italian or European flag. Then we have the flagpole, that's usually made out of wood, sometimes metal. And then we have the Flagstaff pedestal, which is where most of our research is focused on. This supports the flagpole either stuck right in the middle of the pedestal or at its back. So we created a scale of damage for these Flagstaff pedestals from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, and those are the ones that are beyond repair. You can't really see any of the words or the art that's on it, and usually they're not strong enough to be able to support a pole. And then 5 is very pristine, very minimal damage, and you can see everything. So over half of the Flagstaff pedestals were rated either slightly damaged or pristine, with 37 being rated slightly damaged as the majority. This shows that they're very well maintained in Venice and very minimal damage to most of them. So we wanted to see if there was a correlation between the functionality and the scale of damage. So when we were recording this in the field, we wanted to see if they were functional. So we considered a Flagstaff pedestal that had a pole and a flag connected as functional because they're being used the way they were intended. And then semi-functional has the pole is in the pedestal, but they're not flying the flag, so they're not being used the way they're supposed to be used. And then non-functional is just the pedestal, and they don't have a pole. So when we wanted to see if the ones that had a flagpole and a flag were being maintained. So out of the 25 that did have both, 19 of them were rated a 4 or 5, so they were very minimal damage. So we can conclude that most of these flag pedestals that are being used, they're more maintained and they're less damaged. Oh, sorry. So then we also updated the VPC cartography maps to highlight the flagpoles, and with that we connected our Venepedia pages, and we created an updated singular, plural, and individual pages for each artifact.
The next type of artifact that we documented and updated were the street altars of Venice. As you can see, these are the components of the street altar that we found as we did our fieldwork. The first and probably the most important part of the street altar is the religious figure. Most oftentimes it would depict the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, Jesus himself, or other popular saints. Then we also noticed lights. Most commonly they were either found on the shelves as candles or inside as light bulbs or LED lights. And then we also found gates that protect some of the street altars' interiors. Not all street altars had them. However, you can see like the different designs and all of some of them are quite extravagant. We also noticed that there were flowers at almost every street altar. The flowers found on the interior of the street altar itself were more commonly fake flowers, whereas the real flowers were found on the outside or in front of the gate, so people are able to drop by, bring a fresh set of flowers if they notice that their flowers might be dying. And then we also noticed that some street altars had the offering slot, and the money that is put into these offerings are for the community to maintain and restore these their street altars to keep them in pristine condition. Similar to the Flagstaff pedestals, we created a scale of damage on a scale of 1 to 5, with the 1 being beyond repair. For street altars, this included the fact that the religious figure, you don't really know who you're worshiping or praying to, and there's really no structure for the street altar to be kind of rebuilt or to put in a religious figure. And then a 5 being that the structure is there and the religious figure is very clearly depicted, and most, if not all, of those components were included in that street altar. 71% of the street altars were rated as slightly damaged or pristine, with the most frequent rating being a 4, which means there's just some visible damage, but however, it was still very obviously being used. 80% of the street altars with a gate were rated slightly damaged or pristine. We can theorize that this is because the gate protects some form of protection from weathering or any external factors that might affect the state of the street altar. And then most of the street altars with a light source were rated slightly damaged or pristine. We also theorize that this may be due to it being lighted, therefore like spotlighting up someone who might be trying to tamper with the street altar. Historically, these were used as a way of lighting the streets. However, in our data, we didn't really see this trend as some of these street altars, as they're quite old, were restored and renovated.
All right, getting into the bigger part of our project, the inscriptions. We documented over 1,000 different inscriptions throughout the city. 3/4 of them came from this book, Lapidi e Iscrizioni. And we do want to give a thank you to the publisher from Supernova that published this book, Giovanni Di Stefano. He gave us an online version of this that we could use, so when we were doing field work, we could have it on our phone so we could match the inscription that we found as we were documenting it and taking a picture to an entry that you see on the right that includes a specific number that marks the inscription, as well as an address number, and this is the area that it was located in, as well as either a transcription, as you see here, or a photo of the inscription that was taken when the book was originally made. Now, we focused on entries that had these transcriptions because we could actually translate them and get content out of it. So out of the about 750 that we matched to a entry in this book, about 650 of them had a written transcription that we could get data from. So when we were getting this data, one of the bigger things that we looked at was the language that the inscription was originally written in, and we noticed that about half of the ones that we had were written in Italian, and they were spread all across, which makes sense. We are in Italy, so having it be the most prominent language does make a lot of sense. The second most prominent language was Latin, taking up about 1/3 of the inscriptions that we're able to document. So this is really interesting because how old the Latin language is. It's not really used or written in very commonly nowadays. So all of these inscriptions being particularly old and being in these good conditions and still being up around the city tells a lot to what they mean to the history and the culture of Venice itself. The next most prominent one was in some form of Venetian dialect, ranging from older Venetian that was closer to Latin to more recent ones, which is closer to Italian with a little bit of spelling or pronunciation differences. This was about 50 inscriptions that we were able to notice, and then the rest being spread up between Hebrew, English, German, French, and Greek as well. So these were about 2 to 3 inscriptions per, some of the most prominent being the Hebrew ones that were located in the Jewish ghetto in Cannaregio.
In addition to categorizing our inscriptions by the language they are in, we also wanted to categorize them by their purpose and the content of the writing within these inscriptions. Our largest category was inscriptions concerning historical figures. We had over 300 of them. This example on the right here is of Antonio Vivaldi, the famous musician, and this particular inscription is on the outside of the church that he was baptized in. Our second biggest category was inscriptions that were referencing religion and religious figures. Again, we had a very large number of these. This example on the right of talking about Albino Luciani, who was a cardinal, and this one talks about how he would visit the church this inscription was placed upon during Christmas time every year and bless the nativity scene within it. Next, we had a category of laws or political figures. This particular inscription on the right is outside a church, and it describes the various actions that were illegal on the bounds of this church. These include setting up shops nearby and also blaspheming, which carried quite a steep sentence back in the day this was placed. Next, we have the category of wars and historical events. This includes the revolution from 1848 to 1849, World War I, and World War II. The inscription on the right is a typical example of a plaque commemorating a building that was struck by a bomb during World War I. This was dropped by the Austrians in 1918. Lastly, we have inscriptions under the category that talk about when they were built or restored. This is a particularly interesting inscription on the right, talking about how this line was originally chiseled off by Napoleon when he conquered Venice in 1797, and how it was later replaced in 1918.
So why go through all the trouble of going through every single inscription that we documented one by one and checking off what it was talking about? Our goal was to create a design of an application that could be implemented by the VPC that would make this catalog filterable and sortable, so that way people could access it when they are visiting, or people could access it because, like Professor Nitsch, having an inscription right outside of your house and not knowing what it means, you want to know what it says, you can know the translation, and you could get as much information as possible. So our team developed this application proposal. It's not implemented yet, but we are going to go through an example of, if you want to look for an inscription that is in Latin in San Polo, how would it be used and how accessible is it? You would click the search button. It would open up this page with a search bar as well as a list of all the inscriptions that we would have cataloged in this website. You'd use the filters on the right till you find language, which is what we want to sort for. You'd click on that. You'd click on Latin, which is the specific language we want, and it would automatically filter by Latin inscriptions. Then you would type in the search bar. You could type either a keyword that is transcribed upon it or even part of an English translation. Or you could type in the cistieri or specific address. In this case, we would type in San Polo, and we would get the San Polo ones in Latin. And we want to look at the inscription that is at address San Polo 1. We'd click on that, and it would open up all the information on it, including our picture, the original transcription from the book, as well as English translations, Italian translations, more specific geographic locations, or the link to our Venepedia page as well on this specific transcription, so you can look more deeper into our research as well.
Similar to our other artifacts, we categorize the inscriptions on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being inscriptions that are beyond repair. They're completely illegible, all the way to 5, which are inscriptions that are in pristine condition, completely legible, with very little to no damage. We want to highlight the category of 2 for the inscriptions because these are particularly important. They're at the very verge of being lost to time, and if restoration efforts are not taken soon, these will soon be lost.
As you could see, there are a lot of inscriptions that were written on plaques and are put up on the sides or the fronts of the buildings. As you could imagine, putting a plaque up in previous years versus now is very different, where you're following a set of guidelines that include making sure your message complies with the regulations, submitting a formal request for a permit, and approval from the City of Venice and the Archaeological Department in order to make sure that we're preserving the history of Venice and the integrity of the structures of the buildings. As Venice is a part of the UNESCO World Heritage Center, this is one of the steps to take to make sure that we're not really damaging or taking away from the culture.
Now we have a few final recommendations for future research. We recommend that future VPC projects look into visiting the Flagstaff pedestals, street altars, and remaining inscriptions that were not that were cataloged in the book that we did not visit during our time here, and document these in a new project. Additionally, we recommend that a future project research the possibility of adding gates to the street altars that do not currently have ones, as we found, based on our research, that these gates were effective in protecting the contents of the street altars, not only from weathering, but also from vandalism. Additionally, we recommend that future projects transcribe the remaining inscriptions from the book that were not transcribed for us already, and implement the application that we proposed in this presentation. Thank you. If you have any other questions or want to dive deeper into our research, you can find our information in the VPC repositories on the VPC website. I will open up to questions.
Thank you. Questions?
What was your favorite inscription that you found?
I found a guy that he was part of some sort of war, and then he did I think Professor Fabio mentioned it, but something about going to the Arctic and then passing away in the Arctic. So that one was cool, and we looked into that, and I think it was something that you talked about.
Just a sec. Excuse me. Sorry.
I was curious if you had or were able to get any sense of who owns or take care of these street altars.
From the conversations we had, Professor Nitch, and then we also talked with Professor Carrera about who they think really own. I wouldn't say own, as it's more of a community that takes it over. It just depends on the community and whether they're able to take care of that street altar. Same thing with, like, if it's near a church, it would be the church that really fundraises for those restoration efforts. And then speaking with Professor Nitch, she was explaining how someone was explaining that if, like, the older grandparent generation passes away, it's really not going to be as restored in the future generations as it was, just because the cultural and, like, religious meanings, I guess, in Venice kind of start declining a little bit.
Yes.
Yes.
They ran into some guy that was restoring altars.
Yes.
So somebody's out there doing it. Yeah.
Yes. Really? That was actually the one that me and Marissa, when we were doing our field work, we saw him renovating, so. Yeah.
So we got to track this man down.
I have a question about all the inscriptions, all the catalog of inscriptions. That's available through Venipedia too? Is that already it's going to be available soon?
That should be available on Venipedia. We have a spreadsheet that goes through every single one that we catalog specifically from the book, as well as our Survey 123, which can also be turned into a spreadsheet that has our catalog of all of them, and that can be turned into Venipedia based on the template that we create as well. So each inscription will have its own page with the transcription and photo and location that we
The
were able to get.
translation.
Yes.
That's a translation. That your team work on that translation, right?
That translation, the transcription was provided by the book, and the translation into both Italian and English were provided to us by Ali when he gave us the spreadsheets. That way we were able to look at it and take content out of it and understand what it is saying. Okay. Yes. And that translating was done through Google Gemini AI.
Okay, thank you.
English?
Yeah, there was one or two in English. The English ones were primarily half English, half Italian. It would say everything that it needed to say in one language, and then beneath it, it would give the English translation of it just on the plaque in general. Yeah.
Okay, if there's no more
Tourism.
questions, please thank the team. Good job.